just wait to see what they. I think.
Most of the work could be rephasing would be city centre master plan projects anyway. Because you wouldn't want to do
big bag.
everything at once. No, you'd have to move Pacific Park stuff or King Street stuff. Yeah. So the Britomart stuff, you know, you wouldn't want to be doing the whole.
Well, they come out of the
Inject them all with us.
This is part of the waterfront. He was been folded. It makes a little bit more adaptable, I think, for people.
Some of the work we were already planning to do anyway. Wynyard,
If you just sit there, we can unbow it.
especially around Wynyard, all the seawall rebuilding and
And presumably
moving.
you want to clear Wynyard Point sooner rather than later if that's possible. So,
That was 2025 anyway.
so that makes sense.
Is it tough? Is it bloody tough now, isn't it? You two are both.
And a lot of that would be part.
I'll just wait till a couple of councillors have poured their cup of tea and we'll get underway.
That's Bunny. Second line.
We've got Megan.
A bit of seats. The other people.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume with a discussion of the key item, the only item in fact on the extraordinary governing body meeting that we're currently holding. As you'll see from the recommendations we're making, this is an important meeting because we're being asked to approve the Wynyard Hobson proposal for the base location. We're being asked to approve the host city appointment agreement that you've been briefed on, and we're asked to approve the cost-sharing arrangement between the Crown and Auckland Council. We're looking at a budget of $98.5 million, so this is a significant investment, and we are looking at the fact that there will be other capital works that have already been programmed but will need to be brought forward both for the America's Cup and for APEC. And we're looking at agreement for a lease being granted to Emirates Team New Zealand to use the Viaduct Events Centre. So we have at the... We've had that trouble before from cameras. We won't ask you to leave at this point. If I can acknowledge at the table Dean Kimpton, Megan Tyler, Matthew Toos from Panuku and Fiona Knox from Panuku. And I have in the room also Kevin Shoebridge and Tina Simmons, trying to find where they are. They're hidden behind a couple of rows back. We're going to invite you forward later in the meeting, so I just ask councillors if you could reserve your questions for Team New Zealand, and Kevin and Tina will come and make a preliminary statement and then be available to answer questions if that's okay with the two of them. I haven't consulted with them on that, but that seems to me to be a sensible way forward. That's great. Can I ask, I think, Megan, are you leading off? And just councillors have read the paper, but if you can take us through some of the main points and background it for us.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, you've done my introduction for me, so thank you very much for that. Just to finalise that off, a team from Council, including its CCOs, in particularly Panuku, MB from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and Emirates Team New Zealand have been working hard together really from last year, but particularly in the last couple of months, following the December resolution of this committee, to go and continue to look at alternative options that particularly dealt with reducing incursions of buildings into the harbour or wharf structures into the harbour, reduce costs as much as possible, being very aware of the ability to construct whatever the option is in a very tight time frame, and to leaving a positive legacy for for Auckland into the future. So it was really those four things that drove the teams to be working. And as you will know, just late last week, this particular iteration that we're bringing to you today, the Wynyard Point option, which is the Hobson Wharf, the use of the Viaduct Event Centre by Emirates Team New Zealand as their base, and then the bases on the Wynyard Wharf, Wynyard Point area, came up quite late, and we have worked that through, and this is what we're bringing to you for your approval, as the Mayor has outlined. So what I propose is that Fiona will take us through a series of pictures, basically, of slides, just to remind us where we've come from since December, and looking at the Wynyard Hobson proposal. We then ask Tina and Kevin if they'd like to speak to that proposal, and then we'd be happy to answer questions and just take it from there, Mr. Mayor. So Fiona and Matthew, if you'd just like to take us through the slides, that'd be great.
Sure, Morena. Just a few slides from us, which just, as Megan said, refreshes where we've come from in terms of our time frame around this work. So on the 23rd of November, Council considered three options for negotiation between Council, Government and ETNZ. On the 14th of December, that translated into one location, which we've been calling the Wynyard Basin option. That consent, we got a recommendation to progress with that particular option, and that consent was lodged and notified by Council in January. So we've been receiving submissions on that consent over the course of over February. Alongside that work, it was always intended as a recommendation on the 14th of December that we continue to interrogate and look to other options, which we have been doing, as Megan referenced. So we're now at a position where we have a location that has been agreed between all parties, which we are calling the Wynyard Hobson option, and lots of work has been going on to prepare for that consent, which we expect to be lodged early April. So in terms of that time frame, particularly with the consent, it's recommended as per the last recommendation in December that goes through a direct referral through the Environment Court, and that consent, if it is granted in October, should be granted in October, which will allow construction to start. And the rest of the activity is through to the event, which happens in 2021. Just a reminder on the timeframes, as you might remember, we had a lot of criteria that we were working to make sure that the event and all the infrastructure we were providing for was fit for purpose. We also worked to some certain timeframes, which I'm just giving you a refresh on here, which is also in the paper. That's about the actual event happening up till March 2021, and then there are lead-up events prior to that, which happened January, February, and the Christmas Cup in 2020. So that's around the core timeframes that we're working to. Last time we looked at providing for 8, perhaps up to 10 bases. That's now been refined down to 7, and we're expecting that 3 teams will want to be in Auckland set up and ready to go mid to late 2019, which is the pressure on the time frame there. All teams will expect to be up and running by the end of 2019. In terms of bases, as I mentioned, we're working to the 7 teams now, with ETNZ being in the VEC, and a total of 4 double bases and 3 singles. Again, the importance of the sheltered water space, which is why you see the breakwaters and the options, and we'll walk through that. It's really important for the team to be able to have a fit-for-purpose event and have that calm water space, and the importance of providing for other support vessels. So quite a busy water space in a kind of consolidated space. Village feel is really important to the success of the event, and that was one of our core criteria that we worked to. So agglomerating those activities in a single space or in a close proximity, really important, as was security, being able to operationally work properly in that space, and legacy, which is we've talked a lot about in terms of infrastructure, and we've got some more thinking and talking to do in terms of other legacy opportunities throughout the course of the project. So just a reminder of the Wynyard Basin option. You'll see here at the very end we had one double base on Hobson Wharf. We had 4 bases over... What's that? Oh, yeah. We had 4 bases on Halsey Wharf, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we had 3 bases on Wynyard Wharf. Again, we had the breakwaters here to make this a calm water space, and we had a breakwater out here to make that a calm water space in the Viaduct Basin. So that was the one that was agreed to in December. This is the one that we're asking for a confirmation on today, which is a variation on the same theme. It's Hobson Base here, still a double 74-metre extension into the water space. This doesn't change at all. ETNZ is in the Viaduct Event Centre, and we have up to 4 bases on this side as well. Again, still including the breakwaters to enable that calm water space. So these are just a few images that have been created to support the resource consent, and we can talk a little bit more to this later, but essentially, as mentioned this morning, we'll be able to modify this building to allow ETNZ to operate alongside this water space and over into the Marine Viaduct Event Centre. And there's a few visuals that essentially look to illustrate what we think what the place will look like eventually, and it's quite a good illustration of what the legacy might look like in terms of being able to have lots of activity and spaces in the Wynyard Basin, having greater public access out across onto these boardwalks here, onto the breakwaters, further public access and event space on Hobson Wharf. These are just a couple of different slides which show what the building size and scales will look like. Again, this is Hobson Wharf up here and the Wynyard Wharf bases. Again, just a different angle from that too. And that shows the other thing about having this village look and feel is the opportunity around the other spaces, including Te Wero Island, which you'll remember connects through from Wynyard Crossing into the main part of Wynyard Quarter. One of the other components of the resource consent process was the fishing and ferry relocation facility. This did generate quite a lot of interest and submissions in terms that we were had to provide at the time for the decant of these facilities, particularly Sea-Link and the fishing boats, to allow for activity to happen to allow for the event to happen in the Wynyard Basin area. We've done a lot of work with government on what the optionality around those are, and including more operational responses as opposed to infrastructure responses, and work is still underway with that, so we're hopeful that we'll be able to get deals over the line that mean that we can relocate either fishing and the ferry fleet without having to build new substantive infrastructure. So until we've got that deal signed or those issues figured out completely, we will keep the consent for the ferry and fishing application on hold, and hopefully that can be resolved throughout the next month or so. So I'll hand over to Dean around the financials, and then we can open for questions. Do you want this?
Sure, thank you very much. So you will see there a summary of our commitment, or the combined commitment of the Crown and Council, as it relates to the AC36 base cost. So that's 123 million in total. You'll see the event investment of 40 million. There are a range of other commercial and base related costs there that you can see allocated across Crown and Council. That deals with negotiations with other landowners, foregone lease income, etc., and that adds up to the 42.1. And there are some event-related support that we provide, bringing it to the grand total of 212.4 million.
So that's in kind or kind? It is kind of us to do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's budgeted.
In kind. Okay.
So just on that next slide, the Crown, you see that, well, from the first slide, you'll see the split between the Crown and Council. And this meets both Crown and Council's expectations, their commitment to investment. You'll note the split on construction costs there at 46.5% for Council, and the share of costs removing the tank farm from the southern end of Wynyard Point. We have talked about it before, but the opportunity to resolve some of those lease issues and bring them forward in time is of advantage when it comes to legacy opportunities with Wynyard Point. There's the decant of Sea Link and the fishing fleets, which Fiona's just touched on. There's the provision for Emirates Team New Zealand using the Viaduct Events Centre and foregone lease income, which has been factored in. So that pretty much captures the financial commitments and cost allocations. And I think, looking at that, that's the last slide.
Great. Thank you very much. I think what we'll do is the first set of questions we'll direct to Council and Panuku officers, and then subsequently invite Tina and Kevin up to the table. So, looking for questions. We'll start with Councillor Casey.
Yep. I've got two sets of questions. I've actually got three. I'll just ask two of them now and come back to me. The first one is the cost of remediation of the contamination. And I want to have an assurance from you that the estimate that you've given us is the real deal. And we aren't going to find something under the ground that will blow that out of the water. So tell me as much as you can in public about remediation of contamination to allow the base to be built.
So we might break that into two parts. First of all, I'll ask Matthew to give a summary of the work that's been done to satisfy ourselves of what will need to occur to provide for a safe environment for the public on the Wynyard Point in the areas that we're looking at using for base purposes. And then I'll touch on how that's been provided for in the total cost estimate. Matthew, if you want to...
Yes, thank you. In terms of the investigation works, where we're at this stage is we've undertaken what's called a preliminary site investigation, which includes a review of all of the historic reporting right through to the present day, as well as additional investigation works. From that, for the resource consent to be lodged, a document called a remediation action plan has been prepared. Now that includes the controls and management techniques for the subsequent development. Now that's across all of the sites on Wynyard Point that are going to be developed under AC36. The next stage that the Alliance will then pick up is in the detailed design, and that will include the specific design details once other things are known, such as the extent of piling or work to under the bases themselves. The key issue with contamination in this area is having the land fit for purpose for the intended use. In this case, these are temporary buildings for the marine industry. So there will need to be a consideration of things such as, for example, vapour barriers under the building structure itself. But as with the present site, for example, the ASB car park site, a significant portion of the land will be hard stand area. And so what can be contemplated in that sense is essentially a cap and cover with clean fill atop.
So when it comes to accounting for cost, which is the second half of your question, Councillor Casey, the design and the cost estimates that you see there
have been factored in to the degree that the business as usual understanding of what's there and how to design for a cap and contain environment for that sort of public use. It's very hard for us in cost estimating to provide for an unforeseen amount. So if there was an unforeseen hotspot of some particular type of contamination there, which we're not expecting, but if we're talking low probability, it did occur, then of course we would need to address that. And we will think through that circumstance in the moment with the Alliance team on how to contain that, or the type of remediation that was going to be most cost effective for the use of that site as an America's Cup base. So the highly unlikely unforeseen cost is not in that 123 million, and I wouldn't expect it to be, and that would not be normal practice.
Okay, further questions, Councillor
I've got
Casey?
one more question, and then you can come back to me if nobody's asked it. I'll ask my other question.
Okay.
My second question relates to super yachts, and I'm just a bit puzzled. Back in the day, staff came to us to tell us how essential berthing super yachts was for the success of the America's Cup, and I read some reports with some estimates of worth about what was going into the Auckland economy, which were made up by the super yacht industry. And now the Mayor is selling us this on the grounds that ratepayers are not paying for super yacht berthing. But in your slide up there, you're still saying, and I'm reading from the slide that you've just put up, importance of providing for support vessels, including the J-boat fleets and super yachts.
Yep.
So can you tell me what's happened to the funding for super yachts? Has it gone into hiding in an operational arm of a CCO?
It'll be self-funded.
Yes, correct. That's the answer. It'll be self-funded. So we worked on a model where the capital investment and the revenue balance each other out, so it's self-funding.
There isn't that's not stated explicitly in this report. It doesn't say anything.
Okay, I've stated as explicitly as I understand it.
Yeah,
It's been given to us explicitly now, but I think we'll all be pleased to know that the super yachts, which do add a lot of economy, they add a lot of revenue to our maritime industry, but they'll be required to recover their own costs. We will not be subsidising the super yachts. Okay, I have Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So I've got a number of questions that just go to the various agreements, the host city appointment agreement, the lease agreement, there's a cost share agreement, and there's the issue of the alliance agreement around how the thing's actually built. And the general context of my questions is around transparency, because we're talking about taxpayer money and ratepayer money, and I'd assume an element of risk, and it's really important to get an idea of where the risk lies. So first of all, just around the lease agreement, we've got a lease, particularly as it goes to the Emirates Team New Zealand area, that's in the Viaduct Events Centre. Mm-hmm. In the event that we don't win the next stage, are we in a position where Emirates Team New Zealand can move out earlier so we can reuse the Viaduct Event Centre for its purpose?
So the lease agreement obviously is tailored to success or not. In the event that the Cup is unfortunately not successfully defended, then the term would be up to 5 years, and then we would look at alternative locations with Team New Zealand for where else they may base themselves. But it's not expected they would continue on at the Viaduct Event Centre. It's a large venue, and it would be significantly more than what they would require, I should imagine. So there'll be no particular benefit in them staying there. And we would have other commercial opportunities that would make more sense for the use of that site. So up to 5 years, and then an alternative.
So within that 5 years, can they move out of the Viaduct Event Centre? Because 5 years is beyond the, the next step.
The first 3.5 years is it takes them through to AC36 defence.
Sure. So it's that last 1.5 years.
Correct.
Can they move out earlier then?
Oh, look, that would be subject to discussion, and it might end up being less than 5 years. But we're not taking that into the conversation with them. We've given them security of lease tenure. That's quite normal, and if we mutually agree a shorter period, then that would play through.
So the lease document enables us to shorten the period?
Well, it would only ever be by agreement.
Sure.
It's a contractual arrangement. We would respect that.
Okay. The other question just goes to the cost share agreement, which I understand has already been signed. As far as that cost share agreement is concerned, if we've got some advantages to us, that is, the costs come down, or in the alternative disadvantage, the costs go up, where are those costs going to lie for specific parts of the cost? There's the issue of this mention of a percentage share, but then there are specific costs. So I don't understand whether there's going to be a split in percentage terms, or whether the cost increases or decreases are going to fall according to the particular parts of the project that us or the Crown have some responsibility for. And then there's the issue of the alliance contract, that is the people that are building it, and their risk.
Sure. So it's moderately complicated, but we have a target cost of 123 million. If through these early stages we identify a more effective way of delivering that, then there is an agreement between the Crown and Council as to how those benefits would be shared. Once we've established a price with the Alliance for building the infrastructure, then if we're able to drive further cost savings against our price struck, and that price won't be confirmed for about 6 months, then the cost savings in an Alliance are also shared with the Alliance members, so that's the constructors and the designers, and that's quite normal practice. So it'll be shared between Crown Council and the Alliance.
Okay, the other question I've got just goes to the budgeted costs.
Yep.
Where have these costs come from? Who's put them up? Is it Council? Is it the consultants that are engaged here, Becker, Tonkin and Taylor and the like? And the related question, what confidence can we have that these costs are accurate?
So there's been quantity surveyors and cost estimators engaged for quite some time that have been jointly engaged between MB and Council. WT Partners, we've had peer review of those numbers done by other parties, so cost inputs into that are generally well understood. I do remind everybody, though, that this final option is still relatively new. So we've got those costs in. We've come up with the number of 123 million. And the Alliance is now taking that on board and working through materially how to deliver the base within those sorts of numbers.
And is there a contingency within these costs?
Very little contingency within those, but that's a budget. So that we've set a budget at this stage. We haven't figured out what the actual design and construction costs are, so contingency will be refined as we develop up final costs.
And the last question is in terms of transparency going forward, because again I go back to this being taxpayer and ratepayer money. These various agreements, are they going to be public once they're signed off and the like, so that people can have some oversight over them?
No. There's a range of these agreements are standard commercially confidential agreements. There are elements of these agreements which we brought into the public domain, which you've seen in today's report, but just like any other contract or lease agreement, those would remain confidential to the parties that have signed them.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions that people in the public may be interested in, just in terms of the the number of bases. It was 8 originally. It's down to 7 now. Is that an absolutely certain confirmed number of bases we have to construct?
It might be better when we bring.
I think Team New Zealand might throw a bit more light on that one for us, Councillor.
Yeah. Okay, I'll move to my next one then, and that's to do with the legacy benefits that outlined in point 27. And I know the first half there are kind of sort of generalised, Auckland plan type benefits that are a little vague. In terms of the actual physical infrastructure, on the Wynyard Wharf, what is it that actually remains that is of use to the public on that eastern side?
Do you want to just flip back to the other one?
This one? No.
That one, yeah. So essentially the legacy we've talked about in terms of accelerating projects that were going to happen but probably a bit later. So particularly for Wynyard Wharf, it will be around, for the duration of the 10 years of the consent, we've got much more publicly accessible space there, which previously hasn't really been available to the public. Much better visibility around access to the water space and that basin that I talked about with the breakwaters in there. We will be able to use that quite a lot for our marine-based events, for public events, for amphitheatres. So it's really about a new space that we can bring the public down to and keep it active and support that way. So it's essentially another part of the waterfront that we can access for that. And eventually, of course, remember the headland park will be up that side of the wharf, and this is a precursor to that development there.
Okay, good, thanks. Just in terms of the costings and the hosting fee pays in that, the hosting fees, pushing nearly 20% of the overall cost. Where does that money actually go, and for what? I know it's been thrown about in the newspapers and whatnot, but
that could be a very good question for Team New Zealand as well, because they obviously have the expertise in that area, Councillor. So maybe if you can I invite you to ask that question again when we have Team New Zealand here?
Okay. Yeah. I guess just Mr. Mayor, what I was sort of building towards, and then people might be able to answer that, is in terms of this cost divvy up, that of course is included in the government's contribution. At any stage, was the understanding in maybe negotiations or whatever that would be something the government would take care of, but the real costs would be getting split, as opposed to the 40 million getting included as part of their cost?
I made it pretty clear in this body and ever since that I saw that as a responsibility of central government. That's a fee to manage the event and organise the event. I was looking for us to pick up infrastructure costs that would remain as a benefit to us as a legacy. So that's how that decision was made.
Okay, I'll perhaps come back to that one. Just finally, we've had a lot of detail to do with costs in terms of revenue that potentially coming into the council. I noticed one of our resolutions goes to a rent concession for Team New Zealand. I'm assuming the other syndicates are paying a rent for their bases? Yes?
No. We provide the base level. They construct their own bases, but we don't get a revenue back from them.
Okay, so
that's been factored in. That's right. Understood.
So, what, if any, revenue do we get from all this investment? There is nothing.
Well, over the course of the America's Cup event itself, nothing directly off the infrastructure that we've built, but in the future, those opportunities exist. But the economic benefit derived from having the event accrues outside of that physical base itself. So that's where we expect those opportunities to arise, Councillor.
I guess, again, I'm just thinking of a direct return to council. So the resolution K to do with Team New Zealand, they're different because they're in a council-owned facility.
Yep.
Yeah.
The only other thing, and we've discussed it already, is that there is revenue from the super yachts, and so that's also helping to directly fund and balance or net balance off the investment required to provide for them. So that is a source of revenue that we would derive from investment made.
If I could just add to that, Councillor, we've never anticipated that revenue will come to council. Government will get revenue from the extra tax paid by the extra numbers of people. What Auckland gets is the benefit of jobs, jobs created in the maritime industry, jobs created in accommodation, in hospitality and in tourism. And the other benefit is obviously the visibility we get for our city, for our harbour, for the high-tech nature of both Auckland and New Zealand, because we're at the cutting edge of that in yachting technology, and the vibrancy and the excitement that you saw when the America's Cup came home, and you also saw during the Volvo Round the World race. So those are our benefits, but they're not strictly revenue, as you correctly acknowledge.
Okay. I've got another question to do with the comparability of the hosting fee since it was started in 2007, but I'll maybe save that for Team New Zealand too.
No, that's good. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Roscoe.
I have two questions. We know that Team New Zealand cheekily asked for a 20-year lease on the Viaduct Event Centre, which we've agreed was supposedly going to be 3.5 years. In clause 28, it talks about the extension to Hobson Wharf, and it says this space could also be considered for a well-designed permanent building for harbour-related activities. For example, it could become a potential permanent base of ETNZ on it vacating the Viaduct Event Centre. Has an undertaking been given to Team New Zealand on that matter? That's my first question.
Not that we understand, no.
No.
So that's just put in there for what reason?
Well, there is a new piece of infrastructure being built which could have various uses over the course of the next 20 or 30 years. So I guess that's a nod to the fact that the waterfront space changes and will grow and develop over time. So we've got the space that we're investing in. We can either leave it for public open space, or as things move and shift around, it could be provided, it could be another use as well.
I think the short answer is the use of that space will be determined by a future governing body at the point that we know whether we are still defending the America's Cup, which we hope we will be, or if we're not, that's a valuable piece of real estate, so we'd be looking at some commercial return on that.
Correct. My second question relates to clause 20, and I sort of wonder if we're undercooking our figures by another $13.5 million, because effectively the opportunity cost or the compensation we're going to have to give RFA is $13.5 million for 3 years and 5 months. Yet it's pretty clear in clause 20 that we're actually leasing it out for 6 years, 6.5 years, which means we're undercooking our figures by $13.5 million, and in reality the true cost will be $112 million.
No, so the lost revenue is in the commercial and base related costs line.
Yep. I understand that, but and that's for 3.5 years, not 6.5 years.
Yeah, but there's then we move to commercial lease terms for the back end of that lease. So the subsidy only applies till 2022.
Yeah, that's set out in
and
21.
So for AC 37, they would be paying $3.5 million a year for the Viaduct Event Centre if they were still choosing to stay there.
That's to be negotiated. That is one of the options.
I'm supportive of this, but I just want to make sure we're being totally upfront.
No, that's right.
On the true costs.
The decision on that will be made by the governing body in the light of events, whether we intend to continue to support Team New Zealand in that way for a second defence, or what alternative option. That has yet to be negotiated. Right. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship, and through you. My question really is about item 27, because I have received comments from people that have been asking about the benefits of this, who are not into America's Cup. And I know anecdotally that there are benefits through jobs, because I've had friends from South Auckland who have worked in, who have picked up jobs from past America's Cups. But I just need to know whether you have any further specific information about the jobs that are created from this event.
I don't, except to echo what Mayor Goff provided by way of overview. Matthew or Fiona, have we got any more detail around where job accrual might occur back through Auckland at this stage, apart from anecdotal evidence?
Well, we have previously done a bit of work around the marine sector, referencing Mayor Goff's point. I think there's a real opportunity for the Auckland Council Group to get a really good baseline as of now as to what we understand is current, and therefore the multiplier effect of what America's Cup brings. MB did do a bit of work on that in terms of the economic benefit of the America's Cup, but I think from a fine grain level there's some work to do for us to baseline all of that so we can really show a demonstrated impact on jobs, not through this event but hopefully through the next one as well.
Thank you.
Just in addition to that, I heard the Minister estimate on the radio the other day that he thought that it was worth $1 billion to New Zealand. The revenue, just to pick up Councillor Watson's point, goes to government, but the jobs come to our city. The maritime industry, I think, if I'm correct, estimated at $250 million worth of work created for them. I can't remember the specific statistics of the last MB report, but they were estimating probably more in the tens of thousands than the thousands. Has somebody got that in their mind?
The February report says an employment boost of between 4,700 and 8,300 jobs that will be directly from the Americas.
That's directly, and then you've got but all those figures are pretty vague. It's hard to demonstrate it one way or the other. All we know is that, one, it creates a focus on Auckland and its harbour, and it's a great tourist promotion that comes without further marketing efforts. But secondly, we know there will be a lot of people coming here associated with the teams, associated with the super yachts, associated with tourists coming to look, people from other parts of New Zealand. It's just really hard to quantify what that adds up to, and I don't want to exaggerate it, and I don't think the Minister, I think he said could be $1 billion, but very hard to say. We know that there are real benefits for New Zealand and for our city out of it. Unfortunately, revenue to council isn't one of those.
I think it's good how Fiona said that this can be a baseline to work from, so it's really good.
There were reports done for the city last time the two America Cup events were held here that again projected that it was worth that it was a valuable event for the city. But let's see what we can come up with in the future to quantify that. Right, Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. To the author of the report, thank you. Very good report. And I've got questions, and then I've also got questions. I think you mentioned, Your Worship, from Emirates Team New Zealand, Tina and Kevin. Were they the two?
They're coming up to the table after.
Yeah. So look, I've got a question for them, but I'll start off firstly to flow on from Councillor Clough, and that's around Council's contribution, in particular the commercial and basic cost, with related cost of 34 million. So my question is, and there's a reference to Panuku as well. So is that 34 million include the cost that they will lose, or monies that they will lose? You've mentioned RFA, and also Panuku was mentioned as well in the report, that they will suffer losses. Is it within the 34 million, or is that separate?
The commercial and base related costs picks up foregone revenue. I can't remember the specifics of Panuku's lost revenue specifically, but that in that line it provides for those changes in use of the land. So that is part of the commercial arrangements with existing leaseholders and the lost revenue.
For both? The reason, sorry, just to clarify, it's on page 12, second bullet point under 21. There will be reduced revenue for Panuku through the change in water space use. So all I'm asking is that, is the 34 million that is our cost, is that loss of revenue also included in the 34 million?
Yes, yes, it is.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you. The answer is yes.
Yeah, and I didn't see the lips move. Your worship. That was an interesting thing there.
Mr. Kimpton, is it included?
Yeah. That's yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, it is.
Okay, and last question to our team, and it's also a comment to you, Your Worship, around in our recommendations. There was a question that was asked earlier around the contract or the agreement around hosting. Yes, it's good having a quarterly update, but I think it's important that if things happen that we get advised ASAP. So I'm hoping, Dean, question, will that occur?
So good practice for us is quarterly performance report into here so that you're across progress, and we will provide an information memo to councillors on a no surprises basis if something material is changing.
And last question, can I confirm after Councillor Bartley mentioned the benefits, can I confirm that there will be some work coming back to us around the benefits that include benefits for the outer regions of the city?
So can I commit to us working with both Panuku and ATEED and the Crown, yes, thank you, Megan, and the Crown, to coming back to you with how we will do that?
Okay, and I just reserve my right to speak. I just put it under the list that you will have, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. My question's probably just trying to flesh out from the point of view of perhaps average Aucklanders about the value for money that's in it for them. We've been touching on it a little bit, Dean, in some of the other questions here. And especially probably more curious now that understanding the revenues going through to the government. So normally with a decision this big, we might have a standard practice of having a cost-to-benefit ratio to look at. So for every dollar that we spend, what are we projecting back in return? Have we done that work? I couldn't see it in the report, so I apologise if I missed it, but is there a cost-benefit ratio that you could share with us?
That was reported in the...
From council's
from council.
point of view.
Yeah, so MB did the work for the CBA, which was reported in the December package of works. Can't recall the number off the top of my head, but we can dig that up for you. It was for the impact for Auckland and New Zealand.
Okay, I think that would be useful to remind councillors about. I haven't got the figure in front of me either, but while they're contemplating that, Councillor, do you have another question, or should I go to Councillor Hills and we'll come back to you? Councillor Hills.
Thank you. And it might not be, we might not have the people here to answer this, but one of my reasons for opposing the original Halsey Street extension was the extensive work that we've done down in that area and what's happening going forward. So although I'm pleased with where we're heading, but what going forward will be managed in that space around access, public access, the amount of vehicle numbers, when we do deliveries, will that all be taken into consideration? Because that space, especially around the Te Wero Bridge and Halsey Street area, that's getting sort of 1 million trips a day of people on foot. So it might not be a day, that actually sounds a lot. But it was in the, I can't remember what it was. It might have been Anyway, the last figure we got was it headed to $1 million, whatever the time frame was. Definitely was not in a day. But my question is around how we, as council, Auckland Transport, Panuku, how will we be managing and helping Team New Zealand, especially being in the Viaducts Event Centre, manage that space and make sure the investment we've put down there is still valued while we're constructing everything and building everything. Obviously, I imagine for the event it will be all open, big public space. But I just want some assurities that we're going to have the space what it's been designed for while that's all happening.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I can respond to that. Firstly, that's actually quite an important point for the resource consent application, because the starting point with Halsey Wharf is that it has a 10-metre strip right around the outside of it for public access. So that's the starting point. That can be closed for functional or operational reasons, e.g. fishing fleet, loading or unloading, or maintenance construction works. So in terms of the lead up to AC36, these sorts of things would normally be managed by way of a consent condition imposed around traffic management plans and the like. The second component to it is actually maintaining Halsey Street operationally for the likes of the fishing industry, and then hopefully that reduces the length of time that they need to relocate to somewhere around the actual event itself. But we're still working through the detail on that.
Okay. And yeah, I guess when we talk about traffic management plans, we often speak largely around vehicle movements, but because we've made that such a pedestrian space, and especially all those businesses, ASB and all the others down there rely on the bridge and the access to get to all the buses and Britomart and trains, I just want to make sure that we're thinking wider than just vehicle movements, and we're not actually disrupting that whole quarter, which we've invested to make pedestrian friendly. I mean, I know it's not going to be perfect, but just, is it night movements? Is it, all those things I think would make me feel a lot more comfortable that we don't, for 2 or 3 years, really make that place the opposite of what we've invested in.
Well, yes, and that again, we would echo that, and that will be quite an important part of the resource consent applications I mentioned, because you do have a string of significant public spaces from Keith Street through the Eastern Viaduct, the Tuero Island, the crossing over to Wynyard, Karanga Plaza, North Wharf, Silo Park, and then you've got the works that will occur to the north of that with the Hobson Wharf extension, changes to the VEC, as well as construction on Wynyard Point. And this all needs to be managed in a sort of a business as usual scenario where we've got events occurring in Silo Park or on Eastern Viaduct and the like.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Dean, for you, 2 quick questions. The first one is, could you give us an outline of the CapEx that has to be brought forward to facilitate America's Cup and APEC?
Sure. So the numbers that we're looking at, 123 million capital for America's Cup base itself across those 3 locations. But as we've reported to the governing body in November and December and inside this report, there is additional investment required in order for us to prepare the city for both America's Cup and APEC. And the timeframes around that are driven by both those events, but also making sure we're not constructing in that area at the time of those events. So as we've signalled previously, there's a balance of downtown infrastructure investment, which is what we've called it, and with this proposal there's a little bit more that we need to do that would naturally accrue to us. So our recommendation, and we'll bring it to you in the May LTP decision debate and meeting, is in the order of $260 to $280 million worth of additional capital expenditure. Of that, 80 to 90 million is already provided for in the long-term plan, and the balance would need to be rephased. On the America's Cup, within the long-term plan consultation document. 50 million of that is provided for. The balance would once again need to be through rephasing existing capital budgets.
So it's 250 million to be rephased through capital budgets in total, approximately?
Yeah,
yep.
Approximately, if I add those numbers up and take away what we've provided for, yes.
Okay, and then my second question is around the, could you give us an outline, please, again, of the governance of this work stream and also the procurement and, most importantly, the audit?
Sure. There's a relationship governance board, which will consist of the three parties. Then there's an America's Cup events steering group, which will consist, of course, of the three parties, mana whenua, and that is supported by an interagency group, which brings together the contributors, MB, Council and others, Council family, necessary to support delivery of an outstanding event, and that's effectively the governance workflow. Out of that interagency into the America's Cup steering group, and if there are issues that need to be escalated or dealt with, it'll be handled through the relationship governance board. In parallel, because in the city centre and waterfront we have a significant amount of capital investment and other events occurring in that space, we have a parallel structure. And so we have an executive steering group that consists of the balance of council family. We'll have others on that as appropriate too, and it's through that we will manage our business of delivery, including the Alliance Board and, of course, the other investments that we know we need to make that I outlined before. Underpinning that, we will need to meet our own procurement guidelines for public sector, so whether that's MB or council, and any public money going in through the America's Cup event work stream would also need to comply with those expectations. So the public can be assured of transparency and that we've got good process in procurement and delivery. And of course that's all auditable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last question, Councillor Casey.
Oh, good. Yeah, there's three that haven't quite been covered off yet. The first one, I'm interested, at the moment there's an RMA process that people are submitting to for a project that's not going ahead. Is that right?
Yes. So at the moment the current application is still in and it's still live. In that sense, the submissions have closed, but clearly we are coming to you today to approve a different proposal.
No, I got that.
So this one is this one would be a replacement should it go through for that Wynyard Basin application.
So that proposal, have we taken it out of the system, or is it still going to trundle ahead to a decision?
No. We haven't taken it out of the system yet, because clearly we want to get an approval to put this one in.
So if this one goes ahead, it will be removed from the system?
Yes, it will.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
And the timing of that, so we need this decision today, and then the consent application for this proposal needs to be completed. It'll be lodged, and the delegation, as per the resolutions here, is with the Chief Executive to pull that existing consent application at the right time, because there are some elements of this that still need to be concluded.
And I understand it was a decision made, it was a democratic decision made by the last council, which I didn't support. But how much has it cost, that project that's not gone anywhere?
I'm glad you asked.
I asked it before.
I've done the calculations for you, Councillor Casey. So look, the original consents cost in the order of 1.9 million. So that's all the experts, the preliminary design, etc., that's gone into it, and that has supported the consent application. The substitute, let's call it that, the substitute application and work that we've done on alternatives between our last governing body meeting in December and now is in the order of just over 400,000, and so that's the subject matter expertise and the application. And on the regulatory side, so this is within the consents team, so the regulatory costs today have been in the order of 250,000.
So that's another 650,000.
Oh, the regulatory costs have been spread. The bulk of those regulatory costs will have fallen to the original application. They've done very little, if any, on this one.
So the cost of the second one, 400,000 then?
Some 400. and
which the
20,000.
government has undertaken to meet.
But the 1.9 is outstanding. That's really hasn't gone anywhere.
So the 1.9 million, sorry, Megan?
I was just saying, because there are elements of the first, particularly from the first application that's currently in the Hobson Wharf extension, we're proposing that in this proposal. So there's actually quite a bit of work that's already done, for want of a better word, in the sense of the technical work. What the real additional cost actually is not in that technical space. It is around some of the urban design and that looking broadly across this as a proposal and the planning work. That's new work. The rest all the technical work has effectively been done.
Right.
So there's no additional cost in that sense.
Thank you for the answer. My second question relates to something touched on by my colleague Councillor Clow with regard to paragraph 28. I had a similar feeling about that paragraph. We have a magnificent maritime museum down at the waterfront that's, could really be very at home on that new space. And I worried too about that seeming promise to any group. Why didn't you say that promise to the Maritime Museum as an example?
I'll answer that as the author. It's not a promise, it was a suggestion. The current Wynyard Basin application that we have in here, actually, that was where Emirates Team New Zealand was going to be, and that application was for a permanent base there on Hobson Wharf. So it was as much a reflection of some decisions or some directions that were given a couple of months ago, but it doesn't mean that would happen in the future. I guess all I was trying to suggest is that we then have a wharf structure, as Fiona said. There will be the next governing body in a few years' time, or however many years' time, will need to make a decision about what they want to do with that. And it could be for a maritime museum.
But when we're looking for a legacy into the future, the Maritime Museum should be right up there in the centre.
I think, to be fair, we have got a number of options we can look at. I don't anticipate that the Viaduct Events Centre is going to be necessarily the long-term base for Team New Zealand, and we have the option of how we might use that into the future. Councillor Mike Lee, who's given his apologies today, indicated that the initial intention around the Maritime Events Centre was for maritime purposes. So we could well go back to that. But all of those are options available to us. We will have space at Hobson Wharf. We will have the Viaduct Events Centre. And we can, as a governing body, make a decision as to how they should be best used for the benefit of Auckland. But that's not for us to do today. That's for us to do at the time when we're considering all the facts that are available to us. But, there is a proposal that the Maritime Museum has to be moved from where it is, which opens up new opportunities there. We want to keep a Maritime Museum. The Event Centre is a possibility. Hobson Wharf Extension is a possibility. But all of those are still in the mix. No decision and no undertakings have been made that preempt any of our decision-making for the future. Right.
The third question, Councillor Cashmore asked it, but it raised another question for me, and that was with regard to the APEC spend, and you're coming back in May to ask us for quite a large amount of money. And can you just remind me what the legacy is for that spend?
For APEC?
For APEC, yeah. What is the big ticket items? Because they're not coming to my mind.
So I'm not prepared for answering that question today. So I'm not. Are you talking about the capital investment? Okay, sorry. I thought you meant more generally APEC.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was but now I understand the question. We will bring to you a list of additional capital investments, and we have already. We did it in November, December, that we believe will be required to support APEC, America's Cup, 36th Defence, but also closely associated with that, we have Precinct Properties doing big development downtown, and we know that we need to address Key Street, seawall and upgrade. So there's a number of things that are all converging in a very tight space in that downtown area that we have to address, and you either address them, some of them have to be addressed before 2021, and some of them you either address before 2021 or you do them afterwards, and if you do them afterwards it becomes very difficult and significantly more expensive. So we have looked to program that, understand what needs to be done, what the case for that is, and the costs associated, and we'll bring you a line-by-line description of that in May.
Right, now I understand that now. The way you answered Councillor Cashmore's question, it was as if APEC was demanding $260 million.
Let me clarify that. I am not intending that our council pay for the cost of hosting APEC. That will be purely on government.
Yeah.
However, I will say that the benefit of the APEC meetings, which will be significant in terms of the visitors coming to the city over the year, will come to Auckland in terms of jobs and income. Right. We now, since, have two more questions. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Sorry, I had my hand up, but it's sometimes hard to get people's attention up there. So just in terms of going back to that extra expense around the new consent application, the urban design, will that significantly be part of that legacy in terms of, you know, the Wynyard Point in that area? Will that contribute to that? So there will be an ongoing benefit? I mean, I'm just, in your opinion, it's hard to say.
I could probably answer that. Look, it's just simply, with the technical reporting, as Megan outlined, you've got a whole tranche of reports around things like water quality, contamination, coastal processes and the like, which are transferable from old consent to new consent. Yes. Yeah. But the one that simply isn't is, as per the images up on the screen, is a landscape and visual assessment, and actually with the imagery up there, all that work needs to be redone by the architects and the urban designers.
I understand that, but
Yep.
what we're seeing then, the ability for people to see a kind of legacy arrangement is really, and that will be a
That's
lasting.
correct. Yeah.
Lasting.
That's
okay,
correct, yeah.
That's good. I have a couple more questions
Yep.
if you don't mind. So one of them is around, in 50 we talk about the different arrangements, things like cost for removing tank farms, decant sealing, etc., but we haven't talked about ASB car park, them foregoing their lease early. Have we got any, is that been arranged, and would we have any ongoing obligations there?
That is factored into our costs. It's much cheaper than was the original estimate, okay. But that is factored into the costs that have been divided between the Crown and Council.
So once that's done, it's done?
Once the lease runs out, our obligation runs out to find the alternative parking.
So we just still have to find the alternative?
We're working on that, and I think we've made... well, actually, one of the officials at the end of the table might be able to...
So we're still working that through, but we're confident we can do that without additional infrastructure, which we considered perhaps was necessary in the last consent. So still under negotiation with ASB.
Thank you. And my final question, it's around the $7.3 million, which will be operational costs for events. I'm assuming that is existing staff we have in the kind of years ahead for our events team, because it says here, it says earlier that it's for Team New Zealand to run the event, but it looks like a lot of our staff will be used. Is that what you're talking about when you say 7.3 million, or will we need extra staff, volunteers? That's what I'm trying to... It says in kind, so I'm assuming that's... We'll just be doing the work with our events team.
For the in-kind components.
There's no money changing hands, but actually it's our staff. But does it mean we have to employ extra staff to deal with it, as we might have had to do at Rugby World Cup or any other major events where we're having to ramp up OPEX?
Steve, I'll get you to address that, please.
Delivery, yeah.
It's really a matter that will be resolved through the development of the event concept, and then again as we move through to the finalisation of the host venue agreement. But we have anticipated that within our current staffing around our major events team, that we would be taking on some additional activity around this, but we would likely have to bring on some additional expertise to support it. We've factored that into the cost at this point.
So that's the 7.3. Yep. All right, thank you very much.
Could I just get a clarification? So AT will be leveraging off the event to get additional benefits?
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Sponsorship, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Last question, Councillor Rosscliffe.
Yeah, no question. Just in recommendation A and B, we don't have the words resource consent that really should be in there. And the first one as a replacement for the Wynyard Basin resource consent proposal, and then in B it should be after Wynyard Basin it should say resource consent application.
Yep, that was taken as being implicit, but we can make it explicit if you'd like.
I think it should be explicit.
Yep. Okay, can I thank officers very much for your contribution, not only in answering questions today, but I know the immense amount of work that has gone into this proposal over several months, and I think we do need to acknowledge that some extraordinary efforts have been made by staff around this proposal. So thank you very much for that, much appreciated. Can I now ask Kevin Shoebridge and Tina Simmons to come forward. And Kevin and Tina, welcome. Thank you very much also. And can I acknowledge, I think, the very constructive way in which Team New Zealand has negotiated with us over this. I know it's been a pretty demanding process from all different sides, but I want to acknowledge that as a result of the interaction between the three parties, we've actually ended up with a better proposal than any of the options that we looked at several months ago on December the 14th. And I want to acknowledge Team New Zealand actually for playing a major role in the option that we're now putting forward for acceptance, and that you were driven by the imperatives we stress to you constantly, that we needed to bring the cost of this proposal down for the ratepayer and the taxpayer. But I do want to put that on record. I think you made extraordinary efforts to say, well, this is what we started off wanting, but this will do the job and this will be more economic for the parties that are actually funding the proposal. So thank you very much for that, and the floor is yours to make any introductory comments you may wish.
Thank you very much. Look, thank you very much for having us, and I hope that it is a red letter day for Emirates Team New Zealand and Auckland in the America's Cup. As Mayor Goff has said, there has been a relentless commitment to keeping costs down by obviously the council and the mayor particularly, his officials, MB, ourselves, as we do tend to live off a smell of an oily rag, so we're well used to keeping costs down, and the challenger of record. It has at times seemed like mission impossible. So, as Mayor Goff has just referred to, in the inimitable ETNZ way, when our backs are against the wall and it is impossible, we look to come up with a solution, even if it's last minute and somewhat radical. So what the output of that is the plan that you see before you today. Everybody is compromised, and I think, Mayor Goff, you said right at the outset that everyone will have to compromise. I think it's fair to say everybody has. And that was the only way in which we were going to get to a solution in the right time frame. So we'd particularly like to thank you, Mayor Goff, your officials, MB officials and CCO officials who have worked tirelessly and burnt the midnight oil, and particularly over the last week or so, where I think everyone is now looking forward to actually some sleep over Easter. So thank you very much for your efforts on that front. I'd just like to, before I hand over to Kevin, just to clarify a point that was raised by Councillor over here. Oh, sorry, I've forgotten your name, but it was a question in relation to the event fee, rather incorrectly referred to in the meeting, in the media rather, as a hosting fee. It is actually an event fee, which, as you know in your papers, has been contributed by the Crown, and that fee is a contribution to running the event. And the event is both on water and off water. And there's a big component in there of, one of the biggest costs is broadcasting, and broadcasting of a quality that can be screened to the world. Now that's not, and also we have made an absolute commitment all along the way since I think the day Grant Delton held up the cup, that this event would be free to air in New Zealand and would be free admission to all those living in Auckland and those who come from the rest of the country. So it is a contribution to that infrastructure cost for running an event, right down to Portaloos. I think Volvo, there was 20,000 people a day. We're expecting at least 50,000 a day during the entire duration of the Cup, which is over the summer of 2020 and 2021. And it is not uncommon. All events have an event fee. So, for example, the World Masters Games, government paid 11 million, and I can't remember who else, but there was another contribution of 11 million, so 22 million for the World Masters Games. So this is a much bigger event over a long period of time. But I just wanted to clarify that for the record, because it has been rather confused in a media sense. However, as Mayor Goff has said consistently, he would not be contributing to that and has managed to stick to that to the end. So thank you for that. Now I'll just pass over to Kevin Shoebridge.
Thanks, Tina. And just backing up a little bit of what Tina started with there, I think the three parties through this whole process over the last 6 to 8 months have always had the same end goal in mind. We've all had different aspects that we needed to achieve along the way, but the option that we've turned up with is still an excellent option. And back in the early days, we were comparing it to Valencia, to San Francisco, to Bermuda, and I think the option that we have on the screen up there easily compares or betters those, so it's a very positive thing. I think the best thing for all the departments, and the most important thing for us, is to actually defend the Cup. For all of us to make the most out of the investment, we want to defend the Cup. So that's what completely drives Emirates Team New Zealand from this point on. Us moving into the VEC in an unplanned way, I guess you could say, is probably the best thing that can happen towards making a successful defence for Emirates Team New Zealand. For us to be able to move into a facility that we will have up and running in a matter of months, as opposed to waiting to the summer of 19 or 20, means a lot. It means we'll be able to launch race boats April next year and be sailing out of a permanent facility where we have designers, builders, support team all working out of one location. That was going to be a very disjointed operation for the first year or two. So that's a real positive and gives us the best opportunity to defend the Cup in 21. It also is a great central location. It puts Emirates Team New Zealand right in the centre of the whole village team atmosphere. So I think from not only from our point of view, but from a public point of view, it's going to be a fantastic location. Best interactive sort of areas for the public to be close to the team. And just trying to answer a few of the other questions that were brought up earlier. Entries was one of the questions. The entry period is open now. That first entry period closes on the 30th of June. Then we have a late entry period that stays open till the end of this year. There are those teams that have already made their intentions pretty clear who intend to be here, but we're not publicly announcing, and they don't want to publicly announce their entries until the entry period closes. We're working with multiple interested parties and teams at present. Another key factor is that tonight we are announcing the AC75 class rules. So that's a document that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 months, which is a 60-page document outlining the new boat and how it is to comply. A lot of the teams have been waiting to see that document until they go further with their commitment. So that's tonight. But it's fair to say that all double bases that are on that plan on the wall there are already committed and taken. Another question. There was another question just regarding jobs in the area. That's something that we think will be a big portion of what we're trying to do. For example, we're starting our own build facility over the next few months, starting up a new location over the shore, which will employ 35 to 40 boat builders. There are engineering firms, spar makers, boat builders, all through the Auckland area that will be contributing to that.
For example, Southern Spars that are out in Rosebank Road who are building masts not only for us, but it's fair to say that a lot of the other competitors will be buying those spars or masts from the same location. We plan to build close to $20 million worth of race boats for ourselves. There's another fleet of support boats that are going to be required for the event, another 30 chase boats plus, which need to be built to help run the event. So there's a lot of tag-on jobs related to this direct. I think that's about me, unless anyone's got any questions on that.
Great. Well, thank you very much to both of you for your comments. We've got a period of time now for questions. I think if I start with John Watson, who foreshadowed a number of questions, one of which has been answered.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and you have answered them. Just in terms of that period of time where people can enter and there's an extension, you seem pretty sure that what's getting provided down here is going to be all taken up. What happens if there's more? Is it just then make your own arrangement scenario, is it?
Well, basically, yes, it's make your own arrangements or we can't accept the entries.
Okay. And you have had offers, I assume, for places like Gulf Harbour who are keen to get involved in some way. So is that, I imagine that's still pretty flux, but again, the onus will go back on the whatever parties are involved.
That's correct. At that stage, yes.
Okay. Just in terms of the event fee, I'll correct myself there, it seems to have moved around a bit. You know, by all accounts, prior to 2007, there wasn't one. Then San Francisco, it was about 30 million. Bermuda, 70 million or some bigger figure. What is the kind of sort of model that you're working to then in terms of what that goes to? And I appreciate there is quite a bit of detail getting provided here. Why is there the apparent kind of flux there?
I think possibly you're talking about two separate things. So this is an event fee that goes to running the event and isn't going to Emirates Team New Zealand. So it's an event, well, people call it a hosting fee, but an event fee, a fee to run the event. I think the figures you were talking about previously have been government contributions to the team. These are
at the previous locations that hosted the America's Cup.
These are the fees that Bermuda paid.
Bermuda,
San Francisco paid.
Okay.
San Francisco.
Yeah, look, I'm not aware of those other than the fact that the budgets or the estimates of what we have done to come up with a figure for particularly the contribution from the Crown, because Emirates Team New Zealand is underwriting another portion of that. This is not the total event or cost of hosting the event. The event total that we are looking at here is somewhat less than in other countries, by some considerable margin in some cases, but that's simply because I think we know how to do things better in this country, frankly.
Okay, and just the final question, and it goes to one of the points to do with the rent. When you, in previous campaigns, you didn't pay any rent for the ground or the location you were using in Bermuda or San Francisco?
It's changed in the various locations. For example, in Valencia, we were supplied with rent-free space plus a building. The teams had to fit out the interior of the building. San Francisco, we were supplied with a wharf, no charge, no rent. Bermuda, we paid a nominal fee for the 3 months we were there, but it was small.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I think that's quite elucidating. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you. I was just doing the dishes, as all good men do. Look, firstly, Kevin, thank you around the jobs, but I have been asked, and I got asked in 2003 as well, around the America's Cup being for rich people only, and that the people in South Auckland won't benefit. I'll be interested in your comments around that.
Well, you know, some of those tasks I talked about there, building the support boats, building masts, etc., that will include people in South Auckland, because that's where those boats will be built, where some of those facilities are. So I think there will be involvement.
Okay, and also on our agenda, and that's under number 45, financial implications, there is a mention of a company will be set up to run the 36th America's Cup event in New Zealand. Is Auckland Council going to have a seat around that particular company that's going to be set up to run it?
There is already an America's Cup Events Limited company set up, and that is, and no, Auckland Council won't, but there is a governance process, as Mr. Kimpton pointed out before, that reports through to, that reports on the expenditures and the commitments and the in-kind goods that are delivered by both Council and the Crown.
Okay, and Kevin, it'll be interested. I'll be interested. I don't know if any other councillor, but if you could just let me know whereabouts in South Auckland. I mean, that just gives me. I mean, look, just even if you email me, for me at least, it gives me because people in my area have asked me why.
Sure.
Especially this particular one.
We have a list of companies which are spread all through Auckland, but I can let you have that list.
Yes, please, because it just gives me something to go back to them around the benefits for South Auckland. And congratulations on winning the Cup, but I also look forward to the Defence in America's Cup 37.
Attention.
Yeah. Can I just throw in a question there you might be able to answer about how many people are likely to come? I mean, you don't know exactly how many teams, but what sort of numbers of people are we talking about coming for what period of time that are directly associated with the holding of the Cup and its associated events? These are not, I'm not talking about the tourists, I'm talking about people associated with each of the teams.
Well, I think typically the teams will have up to 100 people working for each team. When we travel and you take families with them for long periods of time, you're talking 250, 300 people per team, I guess, moving on a full-time basis.
Okay,
we have also the Challenger of Record, Luna Rossa, who are a particularly important part of this defence, and they will be earlier, and they will also bring a big contingent as they are involved with us in delivering the event, aside from their being in the actual sailing races, regattas.
Okay, and they'll be here for what, a year or more?
I would expect so.
Yeah.
Not 100% confirmed at the moment, but I would expect so.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. The MB site said that the last one was about 900 sailing and shore crew and over 1,000 family, and that could be bigger now, but yeah, last time that's what it was. And that's just the cruise, so I imagine. The questions are probably more specific to our physical things around the bases. I'm very supportive of the direction we're going, but what is optimal for you guys? What sort of technology are you going to be using? Obviously, you're going to have safety barriers and things at times and blocked access, but how do you see, and you've talked about village feel a lot, which I think is great, but what do you see the access for the public in and around the bases? Are you thinking of having a lot of easily movable things that when the boats are out you can be closer and there's more space? How do you see this interfacing with the public going forward? Like, what's the ultimate kind of access conditions look like when you're not doing, building boats or having OSH issues?
Well, I think you're right. Like, I think in the plan that's been drawn up, there is public access around the bases, and for us, certainly in the VEC, when we're not actually lifting boats into the water or working on them in the forecourt, that area will be opened up so people have a much freer flow through to get close to the action. There's also good public viewing space on the end of the VEC for people to actually watch that process happening, boats coming in and out. So I think it'll be up close.
Yep. So your idea is to have more public
then,
rather than ticketed entries and different things like
that. Our plan is not to have ticketed entry at all.
Great. Thank you.
Be open.
That's awesome.
Thank you very much. Last question, Councillor Casey.
Oh, yeah, thanks for coming, Kevin and Tina. We spend hours, both in public and behind closed doors, discussing risks. It's ratepayers' money, and that's right and proper. I'm interested in what keeps you awake at night. What's the biggest risk in all of this?
I can tell you what's kept us awake for the last few nights is getting to this table.
Well, losing, be number one.
That sentiment's shared by every person around this room once every 3 years.
We're passionate New Zealanders that have always wanted this event to be in Auckland. That's the whole reason we've ever done it. So, we're just super pleased that we've got to a point that that's happening. And now that it is here, we want everyone to be proud of the event and what we can do in Auckland to showcase the city. So that's what keeps us awake, basically.
I think the thing is that it's been very hard working on the really pointy end of this in terms of plans and costs and time frames and consents and multiple parties, and we've all kind of lost sight of how absolutely exciting it's going to be and what a world-class event we are going to put on as a city. And now I think the thing is we can actually sleep knowing that we can deliver that, so it's probably a better answer.
Kathy, that was your final question. Well, can I, on behalf of all of the councillors here, thank you both for appearing today. Thank you both for the efforts that we've jointly put into getting to the point where we hope that we've found a solution. And I think on behalf of everybody here, wish you every best wish to win this next Cup in 2021, because you saw the excitement and the enthusiasm that generated amongst New Zealanders. You were over there, you may not have seen it directly, but it was certainly felt right across the city during that period, and we were very proud of what the team achieved. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for appearing today.
Thank you.
All the best.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we probably want to try and finish this agenda item before lunch, but there needs to be an opportunity for people to speak to the item. We've had a prolonged period of questioning, which is appropriate, but I'm now wanting to take comments, if we can try hard to keep them relatively brief. Let me, so that we know what we're speaking to, formally move the recommendations set out in the report, which is A through to N. By a seconder for that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and now invite anyone wishing to speak. Councillor Filipaina, followed by Councillor Walker. Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I'm speaking in support of the recommendations. I've made my comments clear in regards to the quarterly update around progress and the programme, and that obviously we need to ensure that if there are any delays that the governing body, but more importantly Auckland Council, which includes our local boards and the community, are advised. Your Worship, the reason I asked the question of Kevin around South Auckland is based from Councillor Bartley's questioning earlier. And can I say, Your Worship, and I've actually saved some of a report that was done on behalf of the Ministry of Tourism in 2003, and it was done by Market Economics. And you know what they've said here, and I'm just going to spend just a little bit of time, Your Worship, on putting some figures that have been basically gathered and are robust according to Market Economics. The first one, is an interesting one, is that the America's Cup had a major positive economic impact for Auckland and New Zealand. The study identified 523 million of net additional spending in the New Zealand economy generated by the event over 2000-2003, which would not have occurred otherwise. And this is, like I said, 2003, some 15 years ago. The expenditure generated $520 million of value added in the New Zealand economy. It generated $450 million of value added in the Auckland economy and significant contributions to regional GDP. Also around this, and this is again relevant to the question I asked Kevin, The Cup-related expenditure also had a substantial positive effect on employment in the economy, sustaining the equivalent of 9,360 full-time years of employment at the national level and 8,180 full-time years in the Auckland economy. I can go on and on and on, but I'm not. The interesting thing for me is the major expenditure was contributed by syndicates, $171 million. Super yachts and other yachts, $155 million. Syndicate communities, $53 million. International visitors, $49 million. Regatta organisers, $29 million. Media, $28 million. Sponsors and businesses, $21 million. Cruise ships, $11 million. But the main sectors to benefit from the additional demand were marine sector, $143 million at the time. Accommodation, hospitality, $92 million. Retail and entertainment, $132 million. Business and household services, $48 million. Transport. Worship, I'm just going to wrap up in this last comment that the report had. In addition to these tangible GDP and employment effects, the America's Cup event generated greater international awareness of New Zealand as a tourism destination and a place to do business, and helped consolidate the reputation of the New Zealand marine sector. Your Worship, and all of us here putting on our regional hats on, and for me, Your Worship, this is a positive for our region, and that is why I will be supporting the recommendations that we have in front of us. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you for reminding us of that. That was the report we were searching to remember what the stats were out of earlier, so well done. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Having asked some questions and had some answers, very supportive of what we're going to be voting on. Having said that, I would suggest that as much as we can, we be as transparent as we can, especially around costs and dealing with issues that Aucklanders might have a concern about as it goes to risk. Because we know we've had other projects that have obviously gone up in terms of their cost. Having said that, this is a win-win-win. It's a great win for the Waitemata Harbour because we've got the least incursion, the least disruption of the harbour. It's a big win around Wynyard Point and obviously bringing forward the accessibility and the use around that. And I guess for me, one of the things that I'm really encouraged about is it's a big win for Team New Zealand, because what we're doing in terms of the Viaduct Event Centre, to use Sir Peter Blake's expression, makes the boat go faster. And certainly that's what I'm focused on, and I think we're all focused on. Team New Zealand's going to go a lot faster, and hopefully they can win.
They will win.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the brevity too, both members. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. First, Mr Mayor, I want to congratulate you and the negotiating team because you have held firm on a lot of points, but you've also compromised, and that's the art of a good deal, basically, that everybody compromised, and at the end of the day, everybody wanted to get this right. And so, for me, I compliment you on not really rolling over on any of your big promises, for example, the event fee, and it was great to have that clarification that it's the event fee and that it actually allows a lot of public access. We also get out of it, you know, new legacy infrastructure and improved infrastructure. You know, every time we've had an America's Cup in Auckland, we've benefited from it in the long term. Our harbour, more and more public access over the years, which people have been crying out for, and it's just a delight, you know, to go down there, you know, from years ago when we couldn't get near the harbour, and now more and more public access. The jobs, and I'm sure Councillor Clough will be really proud, his award-winning Southern Spas and the Faux local board, you know, they built the mast for the last winning team, and they're going to be doing it for a whole lot of them. So just hope they don't make the other spas for the other boats quite as good as the Team New Zealand one. So the other thing, there's the jobs, there's a lot of tangible things, but the intangible thing for me as a born and bred Aucklander is our regional pride. You know, when we have events like this, and they're really publicly accessible. I think you can take away the elitism here, because this is not going to be ticketed. It's going to have people going down there, and we know how beautiful it can be. We'll have a big new hotel there as well. We'll have a whole lot of, that public infrastructure that Auckland's invested in over the years being really well utilised. 50,000 people a day. It's hard to even imagine, but it will be outstanding. So for me, it's a lot of the intangible events, assets which are really good. But I think the one big thing is it will get a fantastic New Zealand community event where everybody will be able to take part, and I think this is the real win for Auckland and New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hills.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say a few words. I think it's been at times very confusing and what seemed like never-ending back and forth, but I think that showed a really positive outcome in the end, and I think that everyone, although not everyone was getting what they wanted throughout the stages of the discussions, I think we've come to a really good space, and I think that's the whole idea of the back and forth and being strong on things. So I just want to thank Emirates Team New Zealand, the Mayor and the team from Council and our CCOs and the government for really working towards a really good option. I think obviously we're not debating having it, because at the time I think it was a unanimous decision. We supported holding the cup here. A few people have changed thoughts over the time, but I think in the end, without question, it's going to happen here. It should happen here. Still a lot of people know us as the City of Sales, but I think also we've got to remember that 2003 event and things like the Rugby World Cup, they create such a big focus on New Zealand, and we're in the middle of nowhere. So most of the time people don't, either they come here once and go, that was nice, or they hear about us but think we're somewhere in Finland. But, this is another way to keep up the ability for selling Auckland as a city to come to support all the work AT are doing, and they will do for us on this. The strategy around attracting people here. Around the jobs, and it will be across our city, and you're not just talking about building, boat building, manufacturing. I mean, the MB study is one thing, but you're also talking about 3 or 4 years, definitely getting more condensed around the time of the Cup and everyone arriving, where you're going to have a lot of media. You're going to have young people getting experience in all sorts of jobs, whether it's security, whether it's hospitality, whether it's the hotels, the increased need. We're going to need a lot more staff on our transport system. We're going to need a lot more staff at all our stadiums and the gallery, and there's going to be a lot of jobs as well as part-time jobs, contracting work experience. And, when I was younger, there was a lot of part-time jobs in retail.
Last year?
Yeah. Last year, yeah. But retail and hospitality, and I remember working in managing restaurants and pubs when things like the Lions Tour and Rugby World Cup were on, and you were able to hire a whole lot more people and get experience. And a lot of young people find it extremely hard to get any foot in the door at any places, and this is going to increase the number of available jobs across Auckland, but also the high-value jobs that we need, the manufacturing, the building, the engineering, and all those jobs that will bring people into up and through apprenticeships and things like that. And what it's going to mean for our city as well is just, we can't quantify a lot of that, and I think we often talk about the cost. Everyone knows the cost of everything, but the value of nothing. I think we need to focus more and more on that we're a city. It's about infrastructure and money and rates, but it's also about making our city a place we want to be in, making it enjoyable for the people who are having tough times around housing, around traffic. You've also got to, in the weekend, actually enjoy the city, the water, the greenness we have. So, the other things are, I didn't support any extension of Halsey at the time, and I remember I lost that amendment, and it was just kind of embarrassing at the time. But I feel like we've come back to a good space of where I thought that the right answer was, and also using the Viaducts Event Centre, which is not building more and more buildings, looking out to our harbour, the whole space and all the investment down in the Wynyard Quarter, and people are going there in their droves, and I was completely wrong on that figure before. In 2016 it was 1.3 million across the year crossing Tawero Bridge, but it was 1.9 million the year after, and so we're adding 600,000 people walking across that space. So I think during this, especially during construction, think it's so important that we make sure we build on what we've got down there and don't reverse the positive investment down there. So I'm really excited, but we have to look at this as a whole city thing, and it will contribute really well. So thank you all for this, and yeah, I think it's about time we just get excited now.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Last speaker I've got down, second to last, is Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I don't want to prolong matters, but I think it's important that perhaps a few qualifiers be put down here in amongst the the many positives that are being articulated by various members, and certainly I think in that respect there has been a real expectation from Aucklanders as a whole that the council do everything it can to secure this cup, and that onus probably more so on the council than the government, to be honest. But it hasn't been all Aucklanders, and I think the Mayor mentioned a little while ago the public split of 65-35 or 70-30 or whatever it might be. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, and also to acknowledge, that there's people in Auckland who would never have been to the Viaduct Basin, far less seen anything in the America's Cup. So I hope our rather lofty aims here in terms of social outcomes that enable all Aucklanders to enjoy the benefits of the Cup are really followed through on, and maybe in a more imaginative way in the past to get some of the sectors of our community down there and seeing what's going on, and getting them interested. $100 million is a lot of money, and this has been a very sensitive issue in the past. I can remember Helen Clark, for instance, being, and no doubt the Mayor was in that government too, being sort of criticised for I think 38 million or whatever it was put into that campaign, and I think the last government, was it 5 million that they ended up putting in for the challenge. So it is a sensitive issue, and I think it pays us not to perhaps throw everyone into the same basket, because people do have concerns. But certainly congratulations to Mayor Goff and Minister Parker for pulling this together. It is a better outcome than the one that we were told was the only option, it seemed to be, just a couple of months ago. And the fact that some of the various interest groups have agreed with that, I think, is due credit to the chief negotiators that were involved. There are other benefits that various people have referred to do with employment and to do with business, so I won't go into those. There's a hope, I guess, in terms of benefits that this becomes a regular event, and I recognise what Kevin Shoebridge said in respect of that, of his big worry, and I think given that this is a sport, we should acknowledge that too. Sport's unpredictable. Very unpredictable, as our neighbours across the Tasman are finding out at the moment. Things can turn very quickly, and none more so than in America's Cup. If we look back to 2003, where our defence there were 5-0, look at the dramatic turnaround with Oracle and San Francisco when they run 8 races in a row. So Kevin, I would say I know our team always do the best irrespective of the result, but I think it's important to remember that it is sport, and you don't have any guarantees in sport as far as what's going to be there or not at the next time round. As far as just finally, as far as the kind of cost goes, again, I hear what was said about the event fee or the hosting fee, whatever you want to call it. Part of me feels as far as the government, not so much Team New Zealand, but as far as the government goes there, it's a little bit like the guys who were out in the town and they're set upon by some thugs and told to hang over all their possessions, empty out their pockets, and then at the last thing, one mate says to the other, here, Bruce, here's that $40 I owe you, just as you're about to be robbed. They have a little bit of a sense of that, but that's perhaps being a little unfair. Just finally, Mr. Mayor, earlier on today we were told about the sum and contingencies and whatnot. I just think it would be important from my perspective to really put it on the record that for me, this is it. What we're voting through today is $100 million, and that's enough. So please don't come back asking for any more. Thank you.
I've repeated that saying to a few officials around here as well. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I think Councillor Watson's really summed it all up. I just think let's just do this. So thank you. I'll keep it short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clow.
Yes, a few years ago, when the Mayor led the campaign of Ports of Auckland to extend the wharf, and the majority of councillors supported that proposal, I was pretty annoyed about that. I felt it was the wrong thing to do, and that people and councillors, the majority around this table, were not taking into the consideration how dear to the hearts of many Aucklanders the Waitemata, and for that matter the Manukau harbours are to us. I feel as though this proposal here and the knocking back of the original intent of Team New Zealand to have a significant extension of a wharf, and we looked at a number of proposals. I can't help but think this is almost the culmination where we won't be seeing any further significant incursions into the harbour, and indeed, along with our water quality targeted rate, we're proposing to kind of clean up the waterways big time. So I think this is a significant step for us, and I hope that we all reflect on that as councillors when we come to debate the Ports of Auckland future, when we have to make that decision. To Team New Zealand, I really hope, as they did say publicly, that accessibility is kept for the public is to maximum, no ticketed. I mean, obviously you're going to have some special events and that, but if you can keep accessibility to the maximum, that is the best way you're going to win the hearts and minds. And if somehow you can reach out to the south and to the west especially, where, sorry, you do not have as many supporters because yachting is not in their blood. They love to go to the beach, they love to go to the regional parks, but they're not yachties, and they're wondering whether it's the thing we should be doing with our money. But if you can somehow reach out to the south and the west especially, because obviously the inner city and the North Shore do get to benefit anyway because of just the accessibility and viewing they have. But that would be good, and make this, because you've got New Zealand behind you, let's just get all of Auckland behind you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I just want to acknowledge all the officers that worked on this. I was told that they worked over Christmas and heavy demands. I'm happy to hear about the jobs and that this is a baseline. And I want to remind people that a good example of jobs and the effect outside the city centre was an employee over at Jackson Electrical, who is an unsung hero of the America's Cup win, and he is also Samoan. So at the end of the day, it came down to a Samoan to get you guys over the line. So I want to remind people of that.
Success has many fathers.
So very, very happy to see this through. But also, when we talk about compromise, I just want to make sure that the local boards also know about compromise when I'm hearing the discussions about rephasing of things in LTP. So long as they're very clear that they're part of this compromise as well. Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartley. If I can just wind up the debate. Last night I attended the topping off ceremony for the new Park Hyatt Hotel. It's a $250 million investment, and it'll probably be, I better say, one of the best hotels in Auckland. And I met with the chairman, and the last time I met with him, I was discussing an accommodation targeted rate. And it was fair to say that he was not enthusiastic about my proposal, which is going to cost that hotel hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra rates. When I met with him last night, he was bubbling over with enthusiasm because his hotel is right next to where Team New Zealand is going to be based, in the Viaduct Events Centre. And he talked to me, not about the targeted rate, he talked to me about the America's Cup, and he talked to me about APEC, and what a great decision it was that they had made to invest $250 million in our city because this was a world-class city hosting world-class events. Exactly the comment that Tina made to us a little while ago. And I think in some senses that sums it up. I'm aware that when we held the Rugby World Cup and when we held the Masters Games, we didn't get universal support. Some sections of the community said, you did fantastically well, and congratulations to ATEED for their organisation into it in the Masters Games. But these were events that Auckland showed they were capable of hosting that brought a focus on our city as being world class and created jobs and sustained our biggest industry, which is at the moment the tourist industry, and sustained a lot of the central city of Auckland. Now, I know not everything revolves around the centre city, but you heard from the heart of the city people the other day that the CBD of Auckland is the 4th biggest contributor to GDP in the country, $16 billion a year. And what I welcome about the America's Cup and APEC is that it is going to bring forward work that we already plan to do in the centre city area. We're going to be the focus of the world for APEC. We'll have all of the top leaders of the world here, and will be the focus of much of the sporting world with the defence of the America's Cup. Now, we've come a long way since the 14th of December when we first discussed this issue. We made a decision on that day, collectively, unanimously I think on that day, that we would go with the original proposal. And we made that decision because that was the best information we had at the time. But you'll recall that I argued at the time that, and Councillor Lee actually, was the Councillor Mike Lee, that we should keep the other option open on Wynyard Point, because for me that's where we were going to get some transformational change if we were able to get rid of those hazardous substance tanks and the car park at the end of the wharf. And we were told at the time it was just too expensive, and we accepted that advice. It was given in good faith. But I said we should keep open the option, and I worked with Minister Parker to look at that option, to keep an open mind, to consider what that alternative might provide. And in the end, with 3 parties, not always moving in parallel, smoothly and harmoniously together, but in the end, we reached a point where we are together. And Kevin, I think you said, you described your new location as a fantastic location. You're in the heart of the village, and the America's Cup is in the heart of Auckland. And we are going to make this the best ever America's Cup. And we are going to showcase our harbour, which we're mightily proud of, and it should incentivise us to clean that water quality up even quicker than we were going to. We are going to showcase the technology that we're so proud of with Team New Zealand. We're not just a tourist and a commodity country, we're a country that can be at the cutting edge of technology. And we are going to be proud of the sportsmanship that our people show, and you know, Peter Burling and the team that we were incredibly proud of on that morning that we brought home the America's Cup. And when we held the parade, there were 90,000 people there. They weren't from the centre city, they were from all over the city. Every one of the wards representing around this table. I walked down alongside, I think Deputy Mayor was with me, and there were people from different ethnicities, different socio-economic levels, different outlooks, but they were there celebrating their pride in being Aucklanders and their pride in being New Zealanders. And that's part of what it was about. So what we have delivered, I hope, is an option, having worked through all of the options. And thank you, officials, and thank you, Team New Zealand, for the effort that you put into that. But we've come up with an option that is lower than what the original option was cost when we've further costed what Wynyard Basin was going to come to. Cost escalation is a fact of life. We've come up with an option that wasn't the original, what was it, how many metres did it extend out?
270 was the first one.
270 or somewhere around that. The original option that Team New Zealand thought was ideal was hundreds of metres out into the harbour. We pulled it back to 75 metres and thought we'd done pretty well. Actually, we've pulled it up back now so that there is only the minimum necessary intrusion into the harbour. We have created a legacy for Auckland. Next time, I hope actually we don't fully realise that legacy for many years, because I want to see the America's Cup won. We're investing in you guys. Don't let us down. No pressure. But if you win the Cup again and we're defending the Cup again, we get all the benefits of the America's Cup with minimal extra investment in capital facilities, and that's really important. We get the legacy of Hobson Wharf, and I talked before, Councillor Casey, about, you know, we've got to think about where we move the Maritime Museum to. We've got to think about a Ngāti Whātua proposal for a Māori cultural centre somewhere close to where the cruise ships come in. We've got to think about what we can create in terms of public facilities downtown. And we create a sheltered space in that harbour for a whole range of maritime events. I think, and I'll finish on this point, that we have created a fit-for-purpose facility for Team New Zealand that you believe is as good as we could have got. We have created for ourselves we've fought for responsibility about the expenditure of ratepayers' money. That's important. But I think we will deliver something for New Zealand, and we claim to be New Zealand's global city, and this is a delivery not just for us, but for New Zealand. No other place in this country could have hosted the America's Cup. So I think we can be proud of where we've got to. I'm still feeling the pain of the expenditure, Team New Zealand. Councillor Watson made the point, please don't come back for more. We need to screw down those costs as much as we can, because I think we've gone to the limit of our expenditure. But I believe that the result that we get from that expenditure is something that will be a great legacy, not just for Auckland, but for this council in making this decision today. So thank you very much, councillors, for your participation, for your questions and your support. With the approval of councillors, I'll take the resolutions A to M as one, unless there's any objection to doing that. If not, it's been moved and seconded by the Deputy Mayor and myself. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no. I'll declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And have a great Easter, including for Team New Zealand. I hope, Tina, you can get your sleep this weekend. And have a safe Easter, everybody. Thank you very much for this outcome.